Okay, so this evening we're going to have a little look at the A320 Airbus in Flight Simulator 2020. We're starting it from cold and dark on the ground, and we're going to power the plane up, and then we're going to take it for a simple circuit around Stansted Airport on the outskirts of London. We're not going to use the FMC because if you start from cold and dark with nothing set up in the aeroplane, you can't actually program the FMC in the Asobo version of the Airbus. It's much more of a study level thing to do, but we can at least have a play with the autopilot to fly around the route on selected mode instead of the LNAV or VNAV mode. Okay, so we're cold and dark in the aeroplane. First thing we're going to do is go and turn the batteries on. So there's the two switches in the overhead panel for the batteries. You see how much voltage they have left when you switch them on. The next thing we are going to do is turn the auxiliary power unit on. We could use external power, we're not going to. So we're going to go auxiliary power unit and then start it. If we have a look outside, I'll explain what the auxiliary power unit is. If you've ever noticed when you see airliners at an airport, there's a hole in the back of them. That's the exhaust for the auxiliary power unit. It's actually a very small jet engine that's hidden in the tail. And it provides the electricity for the rest of the aircraft. It also provides compressed air to spin the jet engines up to get them spinning before the fuel is injected into them. So that light has just changed there underneath the APU. The start light has changed to available, which means it's now providing power and air if we so need it. So we're going to go back up here and we're going to say we want the APU bleed to be switched on, please. So you'll hear that in the background, so you can now hear air rushing through the plane. Actually, I'm going to go and change this volume mixer to make sure you can hear things. There we go. So you should be able to hear that a bit better. So that's the air you can hear coming from the APU, and it's available to spin the engines up now. Before we do that though, we need to turn the fuel pumps on. So fuel pumps are now on. They are powered by the electricity from the APU. So if we then come down and look in the center pedestal here, the engine starters are down here. So we are going to move this middle switch to start, and then we are going to flick the starter for engine number 2, which is the right hand engine. And you will notice the N2 percentage on this central display is climbing. That's the percentage of nominal, of 100% being flat out, of the gas turbine engine on the right engine. And you can see once it gets to 24%, the exhaust gas temperature started to climb and the fuel flow appeared. So in other words, the fuel pumps, once it gets to about 22%, start pumping fuel in, and it ignites, and you see the exhaust gas temperature raise, and the engine will settle down eventually. That'll be about 58% and about 20% for the N1. So N2 is the gas turbine, N1 is the turbofan. If we go and have a look outside just to see that. So there's the fan, and if you look around the back of the engine, the central part of the engine is the gas turbine. So the fan actually surrounds it. Look, the engine is empty around the gas turbine. So there's just a fan blowing air through, which actually provides most of the thrust. Okay. So that's engine number 2 up and running, and we now go to engine number 1. I think the flicker you just saw in the screens is once you are running a jet engine, an Airbus will automatically cross-feed the electricity supply to the engines, and that's what you saw happen there momentarily when the screens were blank. If you fly a Boeing 737 or 747, you have to do the cross-feeds yourself. So there's switches overhead to do it, but on the Airbus it's automatic. So we're just waiting for engine number 1 to come up. So again, it's climbed past 25, the fuel flows appear, the exhaust gas temperature is raising, and the gearbox between the gas turbine and the fan has kicked in, and the fan is accelerating as well. And you can actually hear that happening if we go outside. It's this one. Okay, so back in the cockpit we have the engines running, so we don't need the auxiliary power unit anymore, so we can turn off the APU bleed because we don't need to spin the engines up anymore, and we can turn off the APU and the start light will go out. Okay, so we're pretty much, in terms of this version of the Airbus, we're pretty much there. There's lots of things that you don't have to do in this version of the Airbus. In a more study level one, you have to set up the ADIRS system, that's the inertial navigation system. Okay, as I said, we're not going to touch the FMC. It doesn't work in this version of the Airbus from cold and dark, so you can't actually program it properly. The autopilot does though. So we are going to use, if we go and zoom in on this a little bit, this is the control panel for, but this section here is the control panel for the autopilot, where we can select what we want the aircraft to be doing. Now you can see there are dots next to the various readouts. That means managed mode. So if we had a programmed route, it would be in managed mode. This is a bit of a misnomer and a bug in the aircraft really. Before you've got a route programmed in, you shouldn't really be able to select managed mode at all. So we're going to go, I think on this version of it, let's check it, let's see how this works. Managed mode and selected mode. Okay, yeah, it won't go back into managed mode, look. So there's a bit of a bug that was showing it. Selected airspeed mode. So basically if you click the bottom half of these controls, it's the same as pulling them. So in the real aircraft you pull the controls to do selected mode and push them to do managed mode. So these controls spin, so I can select a speed, which would be for the auto throttle. So we're going to select a good climb out speed, which would be about 220 knots. We're going to be taking off from runway 220, so we'll select 220 degrees and make sure it's on selected mode. We're going to select 5,000 feet and it's on selected mode, that's fine. And we can change the vertical speed, or we should be able to. So engage vertical speed mode. Is it gonna? It might not do it until we're in the air. Okay. The other things we can do, which don't really count for anything if you haven't got anything displaying on here, if we go and switch on the terrain radar, we may see something worth seeing. Yeah, so there's the airfield we're at. It's not actually displaying anything else, but we'll turn that off for the moment. Obviously if we had waypoints, we would see the map on here and we could zoom in and out. I think the weather radar might, no, it's not going to. Anyway, I'm going to leave this alone. The other thing you might concern yourself with is the QNH. So I'm not sure if you can cheat. You can't press B in 2020, I don't think, to select it for you. But we'll just check. If we look on little nav map and right click on Stansted and say show information for Stansted, it will come up over here and we can see the overview page, and if we scroll down we get the weather and you see Q1033 on the weather station output. That is the QNH number. So there are two scales that it can be input in. There's HG and HPA, or hectopascals. So if we flick that over, you can see that's 1013 now. Does that correlate with this? 1033 it should be. Now this relates directly. This is setting the barometric pressure that the altimeter is calibrated against. So it should be 1033. We can spin it. Watch the altitude changing. Yeah, so 920 feet. Okay. Let's go and see if that correlates with what this says. 1033. Have we got an elevation? 348 feet. So yeah, another bug look. That should be saying 348 feet. That's madness. I'm going to leave this on standard all the way round, so they haven't programmed that properly either. Anyway, let's not worry ourselves too much with all the things that are broken. If we go and have a quick look at the map, we can see which way we need to taxi. So we're going to turn right and almost double back. Or actually, we could come out here, turn right, and then turn left to get to the runway. So in Flight Simulator, I believe it's still the same. You can press Shift and P to get pushed backwards. You probably need to release the parking brake before that will happen. Is it Shift P? Was it Control P? Yeah, Shift P. That's the truck was right underneath us, wasn't it? I think he's trying to attach himself. Let's go and see what's going on out there. So this is the tug that's going to push us back so we can manoeuvre without running into these trucks. I wonder how well this does this. Will it suddenly lurch when it gets close enough? I've not watched it do it before. Yeah, the wheel is just... it's not really a very accurate representation, is it? But that's, once it gets onto the plane, it works well though. In the real world, they would ask you to engage the parking brake before they lock on and then release it. Okay, so we're being pushed back, which is good. That's probably far enough. We'll wait until we can just swing straight out onto the taxiway. So we can see the route to the runway. So that will do. We'll stop the pushback. So back in the cockpit while we're waiting for him to get out of the way, the next thing we need to do is get the flaps to take off position. Something we could do actually in the FMC, if it will let us, is set up the performance page. So on the performance page there's a bit of a hack in this, I've realised. You don't have to provide these numbers. Usually you would look up the rotation speeds for the runway in a piece of software on a tablet that the flight crew would have available, where you put in things like the gross weight, the fuel weight, the centre of gravity, and it would give you your rotation speeds. This is kind of a massively simplified version. We can say runway 22. Yeah, it doesn't know where we are. That's half the problem, because we haven't got a flight plan. Can we put in? Let's see if we can do at least. If we go in here and go initialization, can we at least put in from and to? EGSS/EGSS. No origin destination. Yeah, it doesn't like it. The bizarre thing is, if we look in flight plan now, it will have gone mad because it has no idea what we're doing. So if we go into initialization anyway and go, can we go next page? No, it won't allow that either. Oh, yes we can. Just see what is here and what isn't. Okay, there's not much in there. But we should be able to say on the from, we can do departure, runway 22. Yeah, that's, oh, we have to select it, sorry. And we could choose a SID, and we'll just insert that. It's fine. If we go down, yeah, it's completely broken, isn't it? Anyway, we won't get too worried about that. All I was looking for really was to go and set the rotation speeds in the performance pages, and also set the takeoff flaps. So we're going to take off with flaps 1. That's all we were really worried about. Okay, so take off flaps 1. Oh, we have to turn the engine starter back to norm, by the way, and then we put flaps to 1. So if we go and look outside, you will see the back end of the wing has moved slightly, and this part of the wing has moved to make the wing a bit deeper. Let's just have a final check round. We've switched the APU off. Basically, how do you say this? The thing you're looking for in an Airbus is for lights to be out. The way it's designed is if something is lit up, then it requires your attention. You may not require your attention immediately. It may be later in the flight. But if things are lit up, then they require your attention. So I think we're pretty good to go. We might go and turn the seatbelt sign on. It's bizarre, isn't it? They've included things like that, but they've got other things that are more important, not here at all. No smoking on. Yeah, the arming the emergency lights. Oh, there is an arming switch. It doesn't actually work. We should have an econ button as well that's not there to derate the air conditioning system if you haven't got many passengers. Yeah. Anyway, let's see how we go. So let's go and open the engine slightly, turn right. Crikey, that fuel truck is going some, isn't he? Okay, so we are taxiing. Let's center the view up. You can press space on the keyboard to get a better view over the instrument panel. Obviously in the real aircraft the pilot would just crane forwards a bit to look over. So we are going to fly a circuit. So we need 223 degrees for our immediate direction, but we won't worry too much about that. We will be tabbing across to look at little nav map to see where we are, because we don't have the FMC to help us basically. Again, I'm not going to bother with air traffic control because otherwise I'll be distracted from explaining things to you. Okay. Final check around. Altitude set for 5,000 feet, 220 degrees, 220 knots. As soon as I get stable on the climb out, I will control the aeroplane down the runway. As soon as I become stable on the climb out, we need to turn flight directors on. I've forgotten that entirely. As soon as we are stable, I will hit the autopilot. If there's any deflection on the joystick, the autopilot will not activate, or it shouldn't. Okay. Full throttle. Let's move the mouse out of the way so it doesn't activate anything, or doesn't flicker on and off, trying to show us tooltips. So let's just, while we're rolling, keep this down a bit so I can see the indicated airspeed. I'm going to rotate, gear up. Flaps can come up. I'm going to let go of the controls and hit the autopilot button. The auto throttler has already kicked in. It kicked in automatically, but I'm going to pull the throttle back. Now if we look, there is a detent here. We need to line up this marker with that hole on the throttle. Oops, let's zoom back out. and you will see it's in throttle climb mode. So in other words, when you have auto throttle on, all you have to do is put the throttle on that marker, and then you can let go of the throttle. So let's go and look at a little nav map and see where we are. So we're doing 220 degrees. That was actually 223, wasn't it? So we can adjust that. And you can see the plane is gently banking. You can see that on the artificial horizon as well. So let's just zoom in on these controls so we can see what's going on. So we're coming up to 4,000 feet. Notice we didn't have to select a climb rate, which is interesting. And it won't let me select. Bizarre. Perhaps because we're already at 5,000 feet. It's a bit random compared to the more study level Airbuses. Yeah, and look, can you see the plane is porpoising? That's a bug in the autopilot and the programming of the autopilot. Anyway, you can see we're coming out to our turning point, so we're going to need to turn in a moment. Can we reset this to say, to make this the active leg? That's a bit annoying, isn't it? Flight plan. Interesting, I'm going to turn anyway. So we need to turn to 133 degrees. So we change the heading to 133 degrees.
Hello.
And you will see on the map the plane is turning to 133 degrees, so we're going to come down here, then we'll make a turn for 48 degrees. So we just wait for that to happen. Yeah, it's always a bit of a voyage of discovery with the built-in aircraft in Flight Simulator, particularly with the Airbus and the Boeings. They never quite work how you imagine they should, especially if you have experience of more study level versions of them that do behave as the real ones do. So you kind of go and look for something or expect it to behave in a certain way, and you discover that it doesn't. It's a bit disconcerting sometimes. Okay, so we should find now we're flying along the back leg. This is interesting. I'm wondering why I can't activate. Oh, there we go. That's what I was looking for. So, but we want this one, don't we? Activate flight leg. There we go. That's better. So if we go and have a look outside, we're just gently flying along. I've set this to a day in May with broken cloud. I've not set it to realistic weather, just so we get a nice fluffy cloud skies and so we can actually see some scenery on the way around. Okay, so yeah, that will be North Weald Air Base over there. We actually took off way over there, I think. Just looking at the map. Maybe, well, it'll be even further that way. Okay. How are we doing on the route? So our next turn is going to be to 48 degrees, you can see here. We have an 18.5 mile leg. We could actually cut that short. So we need to go back inside the aircraft and change the selected heading to 48 degrees. can see now the aircraft is turning automatically to 48 degrees. Now, something else I'm not sure of, because we weren't able to put the airport in. If we go and look in navigation radios, yeah, no ILS has been programmed yet. So the runway 2 ILS for Stansted is 110.5. So we need to put in 110.50 and plug it into there. And we also need to put in 223 degrees for the runway direction. So we should now find, when we come into the ILS range, we'll be able to switch this display over to LS, and this will work correctly. But for the moment, we're going to leave it in arc mode. Should we try the terrain radar out while we're in the air? See if it lights up and shows us anything. Apparently not. It is flat as a pancake, so you wouldn't expect it to show anything really, would you? Oh, we're in some nice cloud now. Great. Okay, while we're doing that, we'll just have a look at the map. So you can see London over here. There's Heathrow. There's central London. London City Airport. Southend. If you go further south across England, you get to see some of the other places. Southampton over here. Isle of Wight. Way down here, it's Cornwall and Devon. Okay, so how are we doing? Just flying along this back leg of the route. So our next turn is going to be to 329 degrees magnetic. Should we go and enjoy the view while we're waiting? So let's go outside. See a little bit of England along the way. It's quite nice how the shadows from the clouds are cast on the ground, isn't it? Makes it that little bit more realistic. They're quite diffuse as well, obviously because the if you've not seen 2020, which I doubt many people have not seen it anymore, you can actually change the weather on the fly. So we could say, I want broken cloud, please, and it will just draw it. Yeah, it's sod's law that I had to do that right in the middle of the cloud, wasn't it? High level clouds. So the clouds are way up there now. Nothing really to speak of. A few clouds. That's probably fine, isn't it? For our purposes today. Okay, so we're going to turn to 329 degrees. We've got another couple of minutes, or a minute or so before we do it though. So let's go back inside the aeroplane. So we're still only doing 220 knots, but that's not unrealistic because at low altitude you would not go fast with a big jet. Below 10,000 feet you're restricted to 250 knots anyway. So it's not like we're in a hurry. And the big problem if you do go fast with a big jet is slowing the thing down again because they weigh 70 or 80 tons. So 329 degrees, let's make our turn. So we zoom in over here and we move this to 329 degrees. And you can see the plane is banking over immediately to do it. 329 degrees. And we're making our turn. It's interesting that the bits that are missing from this are kind of the fun bits. There's this series of buttons down here called the ECAM system, and you should be able to press these buttons and see displays here of the various subsystems on the plane. like the engine, the bleed system, the electrics, the hydraulics, the auxiliary power unit, the door status around the aircraft, the wheel status. There's lots of things that they're just not there in this version. Something else I haven't played with that I should have switched on is, and it's on, it shouldn't have been on, we can put it onto auto, I guess. It's already on TARA. This is the TCAS system, traffic collision avoidance system. Now when we turn it on, it should have changed the symbology on here, but it hasn't. Oh, it has. It's put the dotted lines on. Basically, if aircraft fly too close to us while we're in the air, it will go off and start beeping and alarming us, just to warn us that there's aircraft in the vicinity. Okay, so we're going to start descending. So this is where we're going to find out if this is how broken this really is. So let's say we want 2,500 feet, please. Now can we say give us a selected? It's not going to do it, is it? It's truly broken. So what about if we just say select 2,500? So we don't get to choose the vertical speed. Wonder if we get to choose it now I have selected the altitude. Yes we do. Ah, okay. So it's just a bit unique the way it works. So we'll come down at 2,000 feet a minute to 2,500 feet. So you can see the altitude coming off. We are going to drop the flaps to, I'm going to use it on the joystick so you'll see it move all on its own. We're also going to come down to 180 knots. And you can see the speed bleeding off to the target airspeed that we've set. The little line you can see on the speed indicator is the rate of speed change. And it basically points to what speed you will be doing in a number of seconds time. So let's go for flaps 2. So obviously that's increased the drag, so the speed is coming off a lot faster. Then the engines are coming up to meet that, to balance off that drag.
2,500.
So we're now going to turn for 223 degrees. Looking good. We'll go for the next level of flaps. So we'll turn the speed off to 160. Go for full flaps. We'll also put the wheels down. And there's the runway out there. Now you will notice now, because I haven't quite done this perfectly, we are off to the left of the glide slope, and you can see that the runway's over there, so we should be over there somewhere. Watch what happens if I press the approach button. So now the aircraft is disregarding the heading and it is following the glide slope. And if we look, there's the vertical part of the glide slope approaching us, because we're getting into the glide slope, and we're at 2,500 feet, which is about where we should be. So it should catch it. You should see the nose go down any time now. There it goes. So the plane is following the descent path towards the runway. So we'll get rid of some more speed. 140 knots. So at this point, what we can do, just to make it a bit more fun, I'm going to turn off the autopilot and the auto throttle and fly it in myself. So we're already at full flaps. So I'm just watching the speed. I don't want to get below about 140 knots if I can help it. Not until we're over the runway. So let's just straighten the view up so we've got a nice view of what we're doing. So we are watching this diamond, that line, and the speed. Those are the things that are most important to us. So we're dropping below the diamond for the vertical part of the glide slope. So I'm going to lift the nose ever so gently and put us back on it. We're approaching the centre line, so we're going to turn back towards it. Appears there is a slight crosswind, so we're going to have to turn into it a little bit. We're a bit above the diamond now, so we're going to dive, well not dive, gently edge our way back towards it. We're going a little bit slow, so I'm going to increase the throttle slightly. So we're coming back towards the centre line, so we need to turn left ever so gently. And we're high. So as the same point as putting the nose down, we cut the engines so we don't accelerate towards the floor. So it's just about balancing forces really.
500. 400.
Looking pretty good.
300.
A bit low. So at this point you're just watching the runway.
40, 30, 20. Retard. 5.
Yeah, the flight simulator is famously bad in terms of the modelling of the aircraft just above the runway. It's got this kind of exaggerated ground effect, which means you almost always slam into the runway because it's completely unpredictable what it might do with you. Okay, so we are going to turn off to the right. Actually no, we'll go to the left. The right is the cargo side of the airport. The left is the passenger side. Obviously if you were communicating with the control tower we would now announce that we are clear of the active runway. And we turn back. And I won't bother boring you with taxiing all the way back and turning the engines off. But there you go, you get a pretty good idea of some of the problems in the Airbus, in the Asobo version of the Airbus. But yeah, for flying it round it's fine, to be honest. If you're on managed mode you'll have a job getting a smooth landing because of that exaggerated ground effect when you get just above the ground. It's kind of a bit of a lottery. But yeah, it works. And if you plan your flight through the menu on the way into the simulator, where you can map your flight on the globe, that all works fine, and it comes into the MCDU for you, and you see your map on the. When you're in arc mode, you'll see the waypoints drawn, and it all seems to work. And you can even do VNAV and stuff as long as you program it through the simulator. As soon as you start importing things from the likes of Little Nav Map or SimBrief, you're going to hit problems because they're not imported properly. Half the data's missing. VNAV will go crazy. But if you stick to the tools inside the simulator, it seems to be okay. Anyway, I'm going to stop the video there.